I'm just on my way back from Taliban. First, I needed to get an upgrade on my prescription so I can use them for driving. And you can go in there. I suppose anybody that's in America or in, say, the UK, the West, will be able to do this, but it's a novel thing for us here on the island of Bohol, which is a tiny little province of a place. So anyway, they didn't have the person there that does the test. But this morning I went to see the doctor, who coincidentally is called Dr. C. So when you go in, it sounds a bit funny when you say, "Can I see Dr. C?" Anyway, I got up the other day in the middle of the night, as we all farts do, and I could feel that I had some moisture in my ear. Put a bit of curled up, twisted up toilet paper in there. I woke up in the morning and was deaf in my left ear. So I left it for a couple of days to see if it would clear, as they say. I used to have a friend of mine, Martin, who was a motor mechanic, and he used to laugh about people who said, "Yeah, well, I felt something was going wrong, but I thought it would clear itself." Nothing ever clears itself. But anyway, I went to see the doctor. He had a look in my ear and found that the wax was impacted down. As they always warn you on Facebook, don't use the earbuds, which I've been using for years. Anyway, I got some drops in, and that was supposed to soften the wax. And I went back today after 4 or 5 days, and he had another look, and he had a pick in there, but it still wasn't softened up enough. So I'm going to do another 3 days of the eardrops putting in there. And while I was in there, he asked me, "Do you have any hypertension?" I don't have any of that, but he took my blood pressure because I said, "Well, why don't you take it?" So it was interesting because he was certainly as efficient as any general practitioner that I've been to in the UK. Didn't have too much to do with doctors while I was in America. Everything is quite costly in America. Had a broken bone, which I had to go in and have done. But doctors, my experience has been, if you've got flu and you go in to see the doctor will ask you what your symptoms are, and then he will say, yes, well, you've got flu. Okay, well, I came in knowing that, and then they try you on something, like, well, let's try you on this, and they give you I didn't do any of that. All of my life I've stayed away from doctors. Now, a lot of people would be saying, well, yes, that's because you're lucky, because you're lucky enough to be very healthy, and that's true. But I wonder which came first, being healthy or being willing to think that a pill is the answer to a headache. And it starts with a headache, doesn't it? It starts with a headache. You have a headache, you take a pill. You have a fever, you take, I don't know, some other pill. And the pill is supposed to handle it. But my experience, when I talk to people, it doesn't handle it at all. Then I listened to a very knowledgeable doctor who was talking about how every drug has a side effect, and this lady went through most of the drugs that we know. This is the ones that I hear people talking about, things like like aspirin. I first got suspicious even before I got educated on it, to whatever degree I am, and I heard about aspirin, and aspirin is supposed to be, sorry, there's somebody walking towards me on this muddy path of ours, but aspirin was supposed to be the head. In my childhood and listening to my parents, aspirin, oh, you take a couple of aspirin and it would clear the headache. And then I heard of milk of magnesia and how they would mix it with aspirin, and why would they do that, I wondered. And I was told because aspirin makes your stomach bleed. So then I started thinking, wouldn't it be better just to have a bit of a headache than have a bleeding stomach? And that started me on this, for what many will call an aversion to taking drugs. So I never took any drugs, never was particularly in a hurry to try any street drugs, shall we say, so I never did. What are the other drugs that are accepted? I never smoked. That's the most commonly accepted drug, along with alcohol. And I had a young man's affair with alcohol, you know, the one where the next day you talk about what a great time you had and how you vomited up most of what you'd drunk, and but you had a great time because you couldn't remember most of it. So I never got into that. Well, I went with Dr. C, and I'm sitting there, and he said, no, I think it's not loosened up enough in there. My hearing hadn't returned except for a tiny little bit. So yes, he said another 3 days on the drops, softening up, and then come back and see me, and we'll syringe it out. So while I was there, he checked my blood pressure, normal. He checked my heart pulse rate. That has always been low because I've never been one into spectator sports. So going to football matches or baseball or soccer or whatever you want to call, it's never been my thing. I enjoy watching gymnastics, but then that's on television. So anyway, I never got into that. So I was always into walking, hiking, swimming, cycling, and martial arts was very interesting for me. So always a fairly active life. I weigh now the same as I weighed when I was in my 20s. So heart rate has always been low, and resting heart rate, the doctor found today, was in the 50s, which is quite low. So low 50s. What else did he check? I said, what about sugar? So he tested for that too, a little blood test for that. That was normal. So I have everything is normal. And he even tested and checked me for lungs, and all of that. He couldn't find anything on that. So I'm in pretty good shape for my age, and even for less than my age. I'm 84 in July this year. I'm 84. So at the moment, and let's face it, it can always change in a moment, can't it? I'm doing fine. But that cost me 200 pesos. So blood test, heart check, blood pressure, and checking on my lungs. Plus what he did for my ears as well cost me 200 pesos. So I'm guessing that for people who have extremely complicated cases, they would probably be dissatisfied with the service. We just had that visitor that came to see us, and he went into hospital because he felt strange, and he was diagnosed as having had a stroke because I think his left eye had started doing a little bit of weird things. So they diagnosed him with a stroke. Of course, the only thing that they wanted to test him for was COVID. so he went through a lot of stuff there in hospital. But of course, what I'm talking about is a normal family doctor, and he was taken in by all of the COVID thing, and I went to see him. Let me see, what did I go to see him for? He always got very annoyed with me because if he recommended any drugs, I never took them. He said, what's the point in coming to see me if you don't take what I recommend? So anyway, I went in, I asked him a question while I was there with getting my mother-in-law's blood pressure medication, which she has to maintain her blood pressure. I think a change of lifestyle would handle it better, but you know, it's a hard sell trying to get people to change when they think that drugs will do it. So when I went in, he had the space suit on and a hat, and he wears glasses anyway, and a mask and the whole thing. It was quite surreal. But this time he was just dressed ordinary. He was wearing a mask, but that was it. So that's my little visit to the doctors, which might be of interest to some people who are coming thinking, well, you can't get any help at all, which really wouldn't be true. When I've said on video before how I broke my collarbone while I was working on the house. This is a few years ago. I broke my collarbone, and I went, horror of horrors, I went to see what even the Filipinos, well, the Filipinos that know expats, foreigners, they call them witch doctors, or massage therapists is another expression that they use, description. And I went to see a little old lady that massaged me here. She felt here. She had fingers like rods of steel, and she pushed and pulled, and she said, yes, you've broken your collarbone. And she watched as Beth started to, after she treated me, she watched as Beth started to strap me up, because as far as I knew, apparently in my ignorance, that's what they did with collarbone. They strap you up so that you're immobilized and you're not going to be moving around, because they can't put you in a cast, so that's what they do. And she asked Beth, what are you doing? And Beth said, well, and she explained, I'm strapping him up to immobilize it and all of that. And she said, why? I said, well, isn't that what you do? And she said, no. So why doesn't he just exercise it? So it seemed quite strange to me, but then we walked a few hundred yards away to where a friend of ours, Brian, an Australian, told me when we told him what the old lady had said, he said, well, that's right. And he said about in Australia that they had, if footballers who were worth a lot of money, if they were off the bench, sitting on the sideline, it would lose a lot of money. So they have these expert therapists who will take them, exercise them gently and gradually get harder and harder, and they would have them back on the field in weeks rather than months. So I took that as good advice, and sure enough, I exercised it very gently. Actually, what I did was, rather than try and lift this arm for this collarbone, for this side, I got hold of and I worked it, but it wasn't exerting any strength or stress, and gradually I was able to do that, so it worked. So there's my $4 visit. Take that in, $4 visit to the doctor, with quite a lot checked. Okay, quite a lot. I hear that they're talking in the UK about where they have the National Health Service, which is supposedly free, and they're talking about a doctor's visit being £10. Well, £10 is a lot more than $10, so it makes you wonder, doesn't it? So I'm home and got stuff to do, so I'll end off here. Thanks for being with me.